Hey everybody, welcome to At the Whiteboard with Pat Lencioni. I almost called it At the Table. We're really glad you're here. We're going to dive into a really fun topic today. Hey Pat.
How's it going, Bo? Yeah, we are excited. We're generally excited. We're here in our office.
Yeah.
We've been preparing for this, and this morning we're laughing, looking at all the people that are signing on. There's
Yeah, it's
somebody
wild.
in a taxi in Paris.
Yeah, if you haven't already, tell us in the chat where you're from. I get to see some of this here. We know there's a watch party happening in Australia and people from all over the world tuning in. And kind of the mindset for us in doing this event is, many of you have read Pat's books, you might have seen him do a speech. I feel like your native environment is in front of a whiteboard.
Yep.
And when we get to work together and going into the conference room and seeing you come to life with a whiteboard marker, it's so fun. So every few months we say, what would be a topic we'd love our audience to just get to see you go crazy on a whiteboard, see you live in your native environment.
Well, and it's funny, this is a brand new whiteboard, and I was very excited about it. Everybody laughed at me because we have like 6 of these in our office floating around.
Yeah.
And every time we get a new one, I'm like, ooh, this one's cool. So evidently I do love whiteboards.
It's very heavy.
Yes.
It doesn't lean over.
That would be our unpaid advertisement for this
If
today.
we're doing something today, yeah. Right. So we titled this Unfrustrate Your Meetings. Why? Why this topic? Why is that still interesting to you? You wrote a book about this 19 years ago, and yet here we are still talking about it.
Yeah, so we wrote the book 19 years ago, but we realized probably a decade later just how we had underestimated even then how important meetings are. In fact, Karen said something today before we started, and that is, you cannot have a competitive advantage in business if you don't make your meetings better. You can do all these other kinds of things. You can buy the right software. You can do team building. You can do all these things. But ultimately, it boils down to, does it change the way you have meetings? And what I like to say is that so many leaders I've worked with, CEOs, pastors, principals, middle managers, have said to me, if I didn't have to go to meetings or lead meetings, I would really like my job more.
Yeah.
And I always thought that was crazy because I never had a football coach say to me, if it weren't for the games, I'd like my job. Yeah. Or I've never heard of an actor saying, if I didn't have those movies and those Broadway shows, this would be a really fun job. Or a surgeon that said, if I didn't have to operate on people, I would like what I do. And the thing is, if you're a leader of people in any capacity, meetings are the playing field. They're the stage. That is the most important moment in your day, your week, and your year, is when you're in meetings getting things done.
Yep.
And the problem is, and we talked about this before we started, it's like, why is this so hard? Because so many people still think that meetings are inherently a problem.
Yeah.
It's just penance. It's something we have to do.
Or they think, well, we got to get this meeting over so I can get back to work. In fact, some of you might be thinking that right now. You might be in a meeting watching this thing, like, I got to get back to work. Meetings are work.
Meetings are the essence of work.
Yeah.
It's a bunch of people coming together to get work done, make decisions. And if you're having bad meetings, you're making bad decisions. And that's what the most important work we do is. And that's what we're going to talk about here during this next, 50 minutes or so.
And we're going to talk a little bit about why you think meetings are bad and how to fix it. And we'd love to hear from you. Put in the chat, what is it about meetings that doesn't work? What is it about them that are frustrating, that are difficult, that you dread about them? What's wrong with meetings? And then we'll unpack a little bit about your thoughts about that.
And we have a whole crew here in the office looking at the chats as they come in, feeding us information about what you're telling us.
So the other thing that I've observed when we're in a room with a team is oftentimes the meetings are the thing they cling to the most. They're the least receptive to changing their meeting structure or the way that they do meetings. Why is that? Why are leaders so hesitant? Why do they want to protect their way of doing meetings?
I think it comes to the point that they've actually given up on thinking they can be better. It's like people that don't like to exercise, which I totally understand. They've said exercising is boring and it's a grind. And they say, I'm just going to do the boring grind thing every day. I know I get into a place like that where I have an elliptical machine and I go, I'm just going to get on the elliptical and do that. But what happens is I start wanting to do it less and less and less. And that's why I'm honestly, pickleball, I think there's all these people that are saying, you mean I can exercise and have fun?
Yeah.
And it's like, it's supposed to be fun. God made us to exercise, to be active and to enjoy it. But if you come to believe that exercise is a grind, you're just going to keep doing it the same way and saying, this is as good as it can be. And I think people are just like, hey, listen, meetings suck. So we're just going to get there.
It is what it is. Yeah.
If we get through it, if it begins on time and ends on time and nobody gets upset, that's a victory. And in fact, that's failure.
Yeah.
So we have to ask ourselves, Am I really willing to look at a totally different way to do this? And that is going to make all the difference.
Okay, so the responses of people why meetings are bad is so totally overwhelming. There's no way I can even. As soon as I start to read one, the screen resets, and there's a whole bunch of other reasons. They're boring. People don't stick to the agenda. They don't end on time. There's not interaction. People are defensive during conversation. There's a lack of safety. There's too much talking, not enough solving. So many. I mean, this would be fun to take hours and go through and read all this chat. But
what I'm glad about everything you just said is that it all falls under the two things I'm going to say, the two highest level reasons why meetings are bad. There's two reasons, and all of those are part of that. And one is they are boring.
yeah,
A boring meeting will never be good. A boring anything will never be good. The idea is we're supposed to be engaged. When we talk about employee engagement, we're saying people shouldn't come and be bored. And if our meetings are boring, that's bad. Let me tell you why meetings are boring. Two primary reasons. One, and I get this from screenwriting because I was a screenwriter in a previous life, and that's why I like to write fiction. There needs to be a hook. Whether you're reading a book or watching a movie, if at the very beginning somebody doesn't give you a reason to care, you're not going to be engaged. And if it takes 20 minutes into a movie or 200 pages into a book, you're going to pretty much set it down, turn it off, or come to the conclusion this is a pain in the ass, and I'm going to daydream or doodle or do something else.
Yeah.
So you need a hook. But part of that hook is that there needs to be conflict in the meeting. Conflict just means something to care about, tension. The very best meetings and movies, in the first 3 minutes, somebody says, here's what we're talking about today, here's why it matters.
Yeah.
And here's why if we don't do a good job, really bad things could happen.
Yeah.
That's going to make anybody sit on the edge of their seat.
And I wonder, I'm doing this live, we didn't prep for this. Well, we did prep for this event, but I didn't prepare to say this thought right now. Tracy's laughing at me, is I think so often instead of having hook, what we do is we have an agenda.
Oh.
Somebody sends an agenda in advance to say, here's the 14 things that we need to talk about in this meeting. And you're maybe not against agendas, but the idea is, that's kind of a lame excuse for a hook. That's a lame excuse to come to this thing, right? If it's like, here's the litany of things we have to discuss today.
Yeah, I've never thought of this, but until you said that. Imagine at the beginning of a movie, if they rolled credits and they said, here's a list of all the scenes and what's going to play out. I would just be like, oh crap, I have to watch 38 scenes?
Right.
Just get me into the first scene and make me care. Now I'll want to know what scene 2, 3, 4, and 5 are about.
Yeah.
And we do that in a meeting. Everybody look at the agenda, and you're looking at it just going, oh, half this stuff seems so lifeless and boring because I don't even know why we're talking about it. Start with the why. Hook people. And then when you're in that meeting, go towards the conflict. Whenever there's disagreement, that's when a meeting gets good. And say, I want to hear about you guys that disagree. We often do the opposite. There's a little disagreement and we say those terrible words. Let's take that offline. It's like the best scene in the movie, we're going to say, oh, if you want to watch that, you have to go someplace else. People want to be hooked and engaged around stuff that matters. And it's all about the stakes are high. The stakes are high, and they're always high.
Yeah.
Within the context. So that's the first thing, boring meetings. Okay. But let's move on to the next one. And they're related, but the next one has a lot to do with the answers that came in too.
Live behind the scenes, we said, yes, we're going to erase during the event because erasing is part of whiteboarding, everybody.
Exactly.
You got to see it live.
Exactly. The next reason is they're just plain ineffective. And somebody said they're overwhelming, and we don't know, are we talking? Are we deciding? Are we resolving things? Are we just throwing things against? And the answer is yes. And if the answer is yes to that, they can't possibly be effective. The example I like to use is I call most meetings, and most meetings we're thinking about here, this is for a leadership team. Okay, we're going to be talking about first, whether you're running a school or a church or a company or a department, whatever it is, your team has to have different kinds of meetings. Because if we don't, we usually end up having one meeting. We call it a staff meeting. It might be once a week or every couple weeks. And we go there and we spend a few hours or more engaged in what I call meeting stew. And meeting stew is when we take all the different reasons for having a meeting, We pull them out of the cupboard if we were a cook, and we pour them all into the same pot, and we stir it up together, and then we taste it, and it's horrible. It's not salty, it's not sweet, it's not vegetables, it's not fruit, it's not meat. It's just awful. And everybody goes, well, this is what we call meetings. Wrong. What we need to do as leaders, as the chefs of our meetings, if you will, is we need to separate out those ingredients in a way that makes them work and taste good. And so there's 4 different meals, if you will, that you should be having as a leadership team, different kinds of meetings. And I want to take you through them really quickly. The first one is, whenever possible, you should have what we call a daily check-in. The daily check-in is literally just getting in the same room and saying, how's it going? What's going on today? What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? We're talking about 5, maybe 10 minutes. No sitting down, no donuts, no agenda, just literally, and if somebody's not there, do it anyway. If they want to call in, fine. If they can't, that's fine. Just get into the habit every day to get together for 5 minutes. If you're co-located and you don't do this, it's just such a waste. Even if you're not co-located, finding 5 minutes where people call in and get on a Zoom call and just say, Bo, what are you doing today? What's Cody doing today? Where's Karen? She's not here. Oh, she's at that event. Oh, good to know. Just checking in with one another. Now, most of us do this in our homes. We have this, but we have the whole meeting stew thing. It's like my wife and I always tell this story. Laura and I will be in the bathroom brushing our teeth, and we talk about everything at once. We say, hey, where are we going on vacation this year? Who's picking the kids up from school? Should we have another baby? And what's for dinner tonight? And you know, it's random stuff, and we're like, I gotta go. And we've talked about long-term, short-term, immediate things, big picture things. And you know, I like to say, then I come home from work the next day and my wife says, I'm pregnant. And I'm like, I thought we were having chicken. You know, it's like, oh, were we deciding that? Or were we just brainstorming? You can't brainstorm, solve tactical problems, and address near-term issues in the same conversation. Our brains just don't work that way. But the first thing we need to be doing is saying, let's have a uber tactical, administrative daily check-in every day. Awesome. The second kind of meeting, though, and this is the one most of us are familiar with, is we like to call it the weekly tactical. The weekly tactical is one of those meetings that lasts, 60 to 90 minutes probably. And the key to this meeting is what you're not going to do there. What this meeting is about, how are we doing? What do our goals look like? Are we ahead or behind? What, is it green, yellow, or red? What are we getting done? And what near-term, short-term problems do we have to solve this week in order to hit our numbers or advance the cause? So it's about tactical things. It's about something that we could change in these next few weeks, few hours, few days. Now, the problem with that meeting is that inevitably somebody says something like, oh, I read this article in the paper that could change our industry forever. Or did you hear about what one of our competitors is doing, and that could affect us in about 6 months? And people naturally go, ooh, that sounds interesting. Let's talk about it now. And this is where we have to have the discipline to say, no, we are here to talk about tactical issues. That issue you just brought up is so important that it deserves more time, more attention, even a little bit of research. And it belongs in the next kind of meeting, which is what we call the ad hoc, because you should have these whenever you need to, the ad hoc strategic meeting. And this usually is probably like 120 to 180 minutes. So it's like 2 to 3 hours, because you're like, this is a big issue and it's fun and it's interesting. And we're going to go into a conference room and get some pizza and some beer, roll up our sleeves and brainstorm and argue and bring in articles to look at and ask questions of one another. This is what most people go into business to do. It's what business schools call their case studies. And everybody thinks when I go into business, we're going to solve big problems. The problem is we try to do these in the same session where we're doing this. And suddenly we're making progress, we're solving short-term problems, and somebody brings up that big, hairy, audacious, and interesting thing, and everything gets sidetracked. And then after about 20 minutes, when we haven't had near enough time to address that, somebody says, well, what about this? Or worse yet, and what about this? And so if we don't separate out these meetings into different conversations, it's not going to work. And there's certain people that are more, and we're going to get into this in a second, that are more inclined to this conversation, and some that are more inclined to this conversation. So there's 3 meetings that every leadership team has to have. The fourth one is called we call it quarterly because we think it has to happen once a quarter. And it's the quarterly, we call it the quarterly offsite. And this is anywhere from a half day to 2 days. But probably if it's less than 3 hours, it's not going to work. And this is where you take a breath, like I need to do now. And you step back and you say, how's everything going? What's going on in the world, in our industry, in our team, among our employees? What are our competitors doing? Let's relax and take a bigger picture look at things, not an urgent look, not a administrative, tactical, or even near-term strategic look, but let's step back and really guide this organization, steward it well.
Yeah.
Okay, these are fundamentally different things. Put them in the same pot, stir them together, and none of them taste good. Separate them out, do them one at a time, and every one of them is actually quite productive, doable, and even enjoyable.
What do you say, Pat, if somebody says, boy, that sounds like a lot of meetings. If meetings are bad, boy, adding more of them sounds worse. How do you respond to that?
I love that because what I say is, first of all, your problem is with bad meetings. When meetings are good, nobody complains. In fact, people say, my favorite day is we're going to have a strategic meeting today. It's going to be awesome. Or we have our weekly tactical. We're going to solve some problems so we can move forward. Or I love checking in once a day with people to figure out what's going on. Or we really need to do. People actually will come to us and say, as a result of doing what in the book Death by Meeting and The Advantage, we have turned meetings from drudgery into our most enjoyable, interesting, dramatic, and positive things. So then what I do is I add it up. I'll go through and I'll say, well, let's say you did this once a day, and you did this once a week, and you did this twice a month, and you did this once a quarter. And it comes down to about 10 to 15% of most leaders' time. And I'll say, do you think it's worthwhile for you to spend 10 to 15% of your time with the leadership team? And they'll all go, absolutely. I mean, that doesn't seem like much at all. The problem is, they're wasting about 40% of their time trying to fix things that never got resolved in these meetings.
Yeah.
And so actually, it's a net gain by far. And if you talk to anybody who's done this, they're like, oh no, we waste less time now and get more time and spend less time in general in meetings because of this. Now, there's one other kind of meeting I have to...
And then there's one question from the chat I want to ask you.
Okay, great. All the others. So these are the leadership team meetings, but what about all the other meetings we go to? It's an update meeting about something, or it's a committee that has to get together, or it's a project kickoff, or whatever. There's all kinds of other meetings we go to. And we want to talk about that also because we think that based on our work around working genius, and this is the most important thing I want to say today, our view of all of this has actually changed. We haven't thrown it out. Yeah. We actually have an entirely better and more effective way of looking at all of this, including these meetings, because of Working Genius.
Oh, there's so much that we're going to get to dive into. So as we are about to talk about Working Genius and you're going to give an overview, we would love to hear your familiarity with Working Genius. So if you would just put in the chat is so fun. Thank you. I love people participating in the chat. On a scale of 1 to 5, how familiar are you with Working Genius? 5 would be, I use it, I love it, I know it well. 1 would be, I haven't really heard of it. Or
you
don't
keep
know
my
much.
pantomime there?
No.
You said 5, and I was like, and then you said 1, and I was like,
wow, fantastic.
And
maybe tell us what your Working Geniuses are too. That'd be kind of fun to get to learn. And while you're doing that, we're going to welcome Cody. If you listen to our podcast, you know Cody's voice. You're going to get to see Cody's face. Hi, welcome. Glad you're here. We're going to talk about Working Genius and about meetings and keep engaging questions in the chat. So let me start. People are responding to their familiarity. Pat, Elizabeth in the chat asked, how do you set stakes for a tactical meeting? Connecting these ideas between boring and ineffective, how would you do that?
I love that question. It's like this. Hey, everybody, we have an hour for this tactical meeting, our weekly tactical. And here's the deal. We all know what we're trying to achieve, but if we don't really sit forward and make good decisions during this meeting, if we don't debate well and quickly focus and not get distracted, we are going to set our organization back. It's going to frustrate our employees, and our competitors are hoping that's what we do, because we hope that's what they do. So even though we might not realize it, the next 60 minutes will probably have more to do with how our employees feel about the business and how we operate against our competitors than anything else we do the rest of the week. So let's remember that. This next hour is critical.
And you could even say, hey, all of our competitors are having worse meetings than we're about to have right now. Think of it that way too. Like, cast the vision of saying, hey, if we do this well, if we can get better at this in the next 60 to 90 minutes and have the right conversations, we're doing it better than they are at that company that's trying to, win.
I love that. I said, let's all picture what we think our competitive executive team, leadership team is doing, and what we hope they're not doing.
Right.
And let's do the things that that's a hook. That's a hook, Elizabeth, right there. And again, this doesn't mean I produced the opening scene of the Raiders of the Lost Ark, but how much more interesting is that than, hey, everybody, how was your weekend? Okay, let's look at the agenda.
Right.
And people are just like, oh, man.
Yeah, try something.
Try something.
Okay, so many responses. 4 is kind of the average of how people are. I saw one person who said they're a DT and the chat is very distracting. So fellow DTs out there, you can close the chat, I think. I don't actually know, and I wouldn't know how to do it if I knew how to do it. But 4, that's cool.
Okay, so if there's 4, if it's at a 4, I'm gonna very, very quickly put the working genius up here on the board. And I'm not gonna do a lot of explanation. And I'm gonna write it in a kind of a new way that most of you have seen, which is about altitude. And so here's the 6 types of working genius, and it starts up here at 50,000 feet with wonder. And that's, wow, how do things work? Why are they asking the open-ended questions and really trying to understand things? Then comes invention. Oh, let me solve that problem that you've questioned me about. And then there's discernment. Let me give you some feedback about that and evaluate this using my gut feel and intuition. Oh, now let's get people excited about that idea because we've discerned it. Let's get people on board and push them forward. I want to come up, I'm going to respond to helping you. I'm going to be there for you because of enablement, which is a fantastic thing. And then it goes into tenacity. I want to help us finish. I want to land the plane. This is 50,000 feet, slowly down to 5 feet, touching down on the runway, okay, or the tarmac. So that's working genius. It's how work gets done. It's not always linear, but it always starts somewhere up here and it has to end up there. And we go up and down depending on what needs to get done and based on the people that we work with. Okay, that's the overview.
Love it.
Is that enough?
Yeah.
All right. So
tell me about when you talk about the elevation, starting at 50,000 feet and then coming down to landing the plane. What's the potential problem there? Does that help explain why some meetings are frustrating?
Yeah, think about this. So let's go to the 4 meetings we talked about before. So it's the daily check-in, right? Which is 5 minutes, let's say.
Yeah.
And then there's the weekly tactical, which might be 60 minutes. And then there's the ad hoc strategic, which might be 2 to 3 hours. And then there's the quarterly offsite, which might be, a day.
Yeah.
Okay. It's really interesting. We didn't know this, obviously, when we wrote the book, but there are different letters that often lend themselves to these meetings. Okay, the daily check-in is largely just T. It's just like, let's just get through this. We have 5 minutes. What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? Where's so-and-so? Okay, what's going on today? Done. Mm-hmm. It's very much around, we're just getting together to figure out what's happening today.
And what obstacles are in the way of getting it done.
Yeah, well, there should be no wondering like, I wonder. By the time you even flesh that out, the 5 minutes are over and people are back. So that's really just a T meeting, if you will. Now, your weekly tactical is probably a lot of this. Short-term things, what are you doing? Okay, let's change that. Okay, you're gonna do that. Who's gonna volunteer for that? Okay, we're gonna get that done. We'll see each other next week and make sure we get that done. But sometimes during a weekly tactical, somebody says, we're a little behind on revenue. And somebody says, okay, let's take a look at it and see. And you might do a 10-minute ID loop. Somebody might say, hey, maybe you should try this. And somebody says, I don't think that would work. But what about this? Great idea. I'm going to try it. I'll let you know how it works next week. So there's a little bit of everything going on here. Probably not a ton of W because you don't have a lot of time for that. But the point here is you should be having the conversations you need to have in order to drive to getting things done. And that's the GET isn't about getting things, it's just the GET. Now, the ad hoc strategic is usually going to be probably more up here, which is, okay, we have a problem. Our competitor is double their size and we're shrinking. What are we going to do? And people are asking questions. Well, why is this? Is that really true? Or is this the issue? Hey, well, maybe we should do this. I don't know if that's going to work. We're really trying to solve a problem. And high-end problem solving happens up here in this loop, okay? And then finally, the quarterly offsite is the place where we're doing a lot of W. We should step back and say, does our strategy still make sense? Is there something we're missing? Are our customers really happy? Are our employees really happy? How are we doing as a team? And then you're going to be doing some of all of these things in that conversation. So there's no one thing like these involve these and then this and then this. It really kind of depends. The point here is this, though. When we come to our meetings, we bring our working geniuses with us. And I will tell you, I'm an ID, and until we understood what we're doing today, I would try to ID every meeting. If I came to a tactical meeting, I was drawn to say, let's reinvent. And people would be frustrated. And I would be frustrated because they would push back.
Right.
And I think that what you said at the beginning of this is that Working Genius gave us a whole new lens to look at this through. Is like, so if you were to go back to the meeting stew analogy that you used earlier, is this is the altitude analogy is sort of that bad tasting stew, right? We did all of this in the same meeting. We wondered, invented, we went to tactics. And so the lens is actually, this is like altitude sickness, right? If you're in a meeting, and we used to experience this without having language for it, which is we're in a brainstorming meeting, which would typically happen in the invention discernment part of the equation. And somebody, a well-intentioned person who has tenacity says, how are we going to get that done? And it feels like you lost all that elevation. It's so hard to get back up to the right meeting. And we've never actually gone this far in the analogy, but what you're just saying is who you are. Like you're the chef, the letter that you bring to the table is like the type of chef you are. You love to make meetings that are in invention and discernment. And so every meeting that you go to, that's where you want to spend your time.
Exactly. So the first thing we're going to say to people as a takeaway is know yourself and that you bring your geniuses to your meeting, as well as your frustrations and competencies.
So does every other person who's in the meeting.
Exactly.
And we never knew that. Right, you would show up to a strategy meeting and there were always people who were sort of frustrated or on their email or wanting to get things done, and now we have a language to understand it. So now that doesn't change the fact that you might need to show up to that meeting. You might be an ET in a strategy meeting, but now you're self-aware and you know, oh, okay, this isn't going to be the kind of meeting that brings me joy and energy, but it's important I participate. Say more about that, because I'm sure there's a question somewhere in the chat here where people say, do I have to show up to meetings that aren't my genius?
Yes. Yes, in this sense, because you got to know how the sausage is being made, especially if you're on a team. Because if every team member opted out of every meeting they didn't really fit into their natural style, then they would not even know how things happen. But like we have a guy on our team named Joe, he's an ET. If he comes to a brainstorming meeting, he needs to say to himself, oh yeah, this is going to be kind of exhausting for me at times. Because they're going to be doing things that I'm like, oh, I'm having a hard time following this. But I need to go there, realize that's the case. And if Joe slips during that meeting and we say, hey, what about this idea? And he goes, we don't have the budget and we could never launch it in 30 days. We would, instead of going, gosh, you're so anal or you're such a buzzkill, we would say, oh, Joe, this is not an ET meeting, remember? We will get to implementation later, but right now we need to stay up here. And he wouldn't feel insulted. He would go like, oh yeah, that's right. And I remember we were in a meeting one day and at the end of it, it was all this. And Laura was visiting that day and she turned to Joe and said, are you exhausted? And he goes, oh my gosh, that was crushing me. And we didn't even notice. Similarly, we have meetings like, hey, our webinar's tomorrow. Let's go through it and plan it. And that's a lot of GET. And I'm up here like going, oh, I'm bored. Let me come up with a new idea. And they're like, no, you have to go over the agenda. We have to get ready for tomorrow. And it's my job to adapt to what the meeting needs. It's not the meeting's job to adapt what I prefer.
Yeah. And sometimes it's the leader's job to say, we're not having the right meeting, right? Sometimes you might be having a meeting and in mid-meeting you realize, wait, well, this happens to us all the time, doesn't it? Especially recently where we think we're having a discerning, galvanizing meeting and we go, wait, we're stuck. Maybe it's because we need to go back and ask a different wonder question.
Well, that's the second thing, the second deliverable we want people to walk away with. First, know yourself and what you're bringing to that meeting in terms of your genius. Secondly, actually have an idea when you go into the meeting what kind of meeting it is. In other words, like, what kind of meeting is this? And if it's one of those four, it's a little easier. But if it's that somebody invites you to a meeting because we're working on this one problem, you have to go there thinking, I'm probably going to be having to use these skills or not use those skills.
Yeah.
And then the third thing you have to do is start the meeting by saying, what are the letters? That's maybe the most important thing we're saying here. every conversation. We call it a meeting, but anytime somebody invites you in and you sit down to have a conversation, really that's a meeting. And everybody should say, hey, what letters do you think you're needing from me?
When we even had a CEO who adopted Working Genius in the context of the meetings in their organization and said to the entire team, hey, if you get invited, if somebody sends you a meeting invite to your calendar and they don't clarify what stage of work we're in, what we're doing in that meeting, feel free to decline. And that's a great way of saying, hey, if we're not going to be clear about what we're trying to accomplish in this meeting, then that meeting is going to be ineffective.
Right.
So do the hard work of saying, hey, we're at this stage of the process. We know we have a problem. We need to get in a room and invent and discern around it. Or, hey, we've already got the plan in place. Let's get in the room and figure out how we're going to execute. And that alone, going back to what we talked about at the beginning, is that is an advantage. If all you did was that and draw a line or circle which letters are the meeting you're about to have, you would have better meetings than most of the teams.
Right.
Your competitor, or even in your own company. You can get more done and make better decisions just by doing it.
But what that person didn't say was, and if the letters aren't something you like, you don't have to go.
Exactly.
No, they're saying if they haven't prepared it well, we still have to participate. Even in my marriage, Laura and she'll say, I need to talk to you about something. And now she'll say, I need your discernment.
Yeah.
Or I don't need your invention. Because and she'll say, what I really need are these things here. And it allows me to go into that conversation knowing what we're trying to get done. And it reduces the conflict. Because otherwise, if she just goes, I need to talk to you about this, and I'm like, well, I'm an ID, so that's probably what you need. And until she gives me clarity around that, it's tough for me to know how to show up.
Right. And I love the conversation application because you are an inventor. And what we will often say that serves our team so well is you'll be inventing something in the office and you also are the founder and the boss. So you might say, hey, I think we should do a Super Bowl ad. And we're like, wait, are you inventing? Are you telling us, are you galvanizing us to go do a Super Bowl ad? And so even the language alone can separate the conversations that you're having.
Yeah, during meetings, you use this language. I say it all the time. I'm not G-ing you. I'm not galvanizing. I don't want you to act on this. So I'm throwing this out there as an idea. And what I really need is your discernment. I'd like to get your reaction to it. I don't want you to think I'm selling you on this.
Yeah.
And then there's other times in life where it's like, listen, I need your help.
Yeah.
I don't need you to go question all this. I'm asking you to do this for me. And in fact, we have some clips from movies.
I was just going to say, I think this is a perfect segue is there's so many great movie clips that we could have used, and we love movies because it captures this essence of a meeting or a conversation. So why don't you tee up the first clip that we're going to watch?
And okay, and these are two great movies. If you haven't seen them, I think you'll still be able to understand it. We're going to do Moneyball first.
Yeah.
Moneyball, one of my favorite business books, even if you don't like baseball, fabulous book, and a really great movie. And I actually had a chance to meet Billy Bean, the character played by Brad Pitt. And it's fascinating. So they're having a meeting, and they're getting ready for a new season, and they're trying to figure out what players to draft and to trade for their team. And I think that's the thing.
Great.
So that's the meeting. Let's go to the clip.
Replace Lencioni, this guy could be it. I agree. Yes.
Damn, Billy, was that a suggestion?
Guys are just talking. Talking la 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 like this is business as usual. It's not.
We're trying to solve a problem here, Billy.
Not like this, you're not. You're not even looking at the problem.
We're very aware of the problem. I mean,
Okay, good. What's the problem?
look, Billy, we all understand what the problem is. We have to
Okay,
replace...
good. What's the problem?
The problem is we have to replace 3 key players in our
No.
lineup.
What's the problem?
Same as it's ever been. We've got to replace these guys with what we have existing.
No. What's the problem, Barry?
We need 38 home runs, 120 RBIs, and 47 doubles to replace.
The problem we're trying to solve is that there are rich teams and there are poor teams. Then there's 50 feet of crap. And then there's us. It's an unfair game. And now we've been gutted, like organ donors for the rich. Boston's taking our kidneys, Yankees taking our heart, and you guys are sitting around talking the same old good body nonsense like we're selling jeans, like we're looking for Fabio. We got to think differently.
I love that movie. I love that scene. And it's a real conversation that happened. Okay. And so let's take a look at this from the stand. By the way, we didn't show that after that when he mentions, who is it, Flavio?
Fabio.
Fabio.
Yeah.
He says, everybody's looking for Fabio. And in the next clip, one of the guys says, who's Fabio? And the other guy says, I think he's a shortstop for the Yankees or something. But anyway, so what was going on at that meeting? Those guys showed up to that meeting thinking their job was to perhaps evaluate talent, sell each other on it, and then go acquire it. So it was a DGT meeting. Like, so who are we going to pick? How are we going to get him? I want to sell my guy to you, and then let's go trade for him or draft him in the draft. Okay? So they're doing that, and Billy Beane, the Brad Pitt guy, he is sitting there watching it, and what does he do? He's like, whoa. And it's usually through asking questions. He says,
What is the problem?
what's the problem?
Yeah.
I love that. They're like, oh, the problem is we're doing this. Because everybody, and he's like, no, what's the problem? And I love how he keeps asking the question. And I love that one guy who you just want to throttle, who's making fun of, he's like, oh, come on, that's great philosophy, but we got stuff to do.
Yeah.
That's often what happens. Poor wanderers. People are like, come on, we got real work to do. And then he says, no, the problem is we're organ donors for we're 50 feet of crap below the poor teams.
Yeah.
And it reframes everything.
And this speaks to how important it is to start with the right wonder question, identify the right problem. That is the true gift of wonder as it represents in Working Genius is, hey, if we start down here, it's very possible we're solving the wrong problem. And so many teams and businesses don't go and start at the very beginning of work, which is what problem are we trying to solve?
And for that wanderer that sees that, they feel like they're sitting in the back seat of a car heading toward a cliff. And they're going, excuse me. And they're like, leave us alone. We're busy driving. And they're like, I think there's a cliff. No, listen, we don't have time for your questions. And he reframed everything very compellingly. And there's a scene right after that scene ended. He says, what did he say about the Yankees? If we do what the Yankees do here, we can't compete.
We're going to lose to the Yankees out there.
He said, we can't do it the same way we've been doing it all these years. So he pulls them back up there. And then what happens after that, then they go and they say, so what is it that we really need? And then they start looking at players and discerning them differently.
Yeah.
And it's a true story. And it leads to them becoming one of the best teams in baseball with no money.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It's truly crazy.
And I love in the context of the conversation we're having today is like, all of the other teams, if you go to the meeting thinking that is your job, you'll solve the wrong problem and they'll lose. And so even just the ability to reframe, what are we doing here? What is the right question that we're solving? And so everybody else could have just gone, that was on the agenda. Hey, we have no third baseman and we have no second baseman and we need X amount of home runs. And so they come to the meeting and are unclear, and that leads to bad meetings and bad decisions.
Yeah.
Okay, I have two questions. One was submitted before the event, and then another one specific to this clip. Somebody said, I'm a wanderer. I have the genius of W, but I'm not the leader. How do I help hold the elevation higher when it's time to be able to do that?
It's like be a hero, and that is be the one at the meeting to go, you guys, I know this, anticipate objections. I know it seems like we have a lot of work to do, and I'm not trying to throw us off here, but I don't think that we're going to be able to succeed if we don't reframe this. And I'd like you to give me 3 minutes to explain why I see a different problem than we're solving here. If all you do is chirp from the back, oh, that's stupid. People are like, oh, you're such a pain. And hopefully you're on a team that gets this and go, you guys, I'd like to take us back to wonder for 5 minutes to check on this. So when everybody else has that understanding, heck, in those cases, they go, hey, you're the only wanderer on our team. What are you thinking right now? So it's best if the team is actually seeking that out. But even if they're not, be the hero that stands up and says, I need to ask the hard question. I bet if you went through history, I'm sure George Washington had to wonder a few times at the beginning, like, we can't. And it's like, wait a second, what is this really about?
Yeah.
And probably every great company, we know that every great thing starts there. And Moneyball, the story of the Oakland A's turning baseball on its head, started with somebody who said, maybe we can't do it the same way we used to.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, this question came into the chat, and then Matt handed me this card. We don't know who wrote this question. It says unknown, unless that's their name, which would be very odd. Do you sometimes choose the leader of the meeting based on what type of meeting it is?
I think the answer is yes, to a certain extent. I mean, Cody, think about this. For years, I was the default galvanizer in our company, and it drove me crazy. And where galvanizing happened like at our daily and weekly things like, come on, we got to keep going, you guys, we got to push the ball up the hill. And I'm not a galvanizer. I don't particularly like that, and it was burning me out. So what I said is, I'm the CEO, and I have to make sure that we do all the things, but Cody is a galvanizer, so I'm going to let you run those meetings because you like to get people moving, and you like to remind people and rally the troops. So yes, you can do that, but what you can't do is abdicate responsibility for that. You can't say, well, I don't galvanize, so somebody else do it. You got to go, no, I'm going to anoint somebody to do that. I'm going to support them in that. And there's going to be times when I have to galvanize them and others. I just shouldn't be doing it all the time. So yeah, it's a great thing to say, we're going to have a meeting to brainstorm. I'm going to ask the WIs to actually frame it up.
Yeah.
And then I'll probably ask the Gs to make sure at the end that we actually are moving to getting something done, so we don't just hang out up there the whole time.
And I think it goes back to what you talked about in the beginning, is the leader's job is to make sure that meeting is good. Now,
Right.
you can do it by leading that meeting, or you can do it by making sure the right people are leading sections of that meeting or portions of that meeting.
Exactly.
Because if you're a leader and you have enablement and tenacity and you're more inclined to the details, well, you still have to have a quarterly offsite. And we've met CEOs and leaders who said, our quarterly offsites are, here's our every schedule, 15 minutes, here's all the conversations we're going to have. It's like, oh no, in order to do that well, you might have to give some authority to a wonder and inventor to frame that up. I love that answer.
We had a CEO who was an ET, and he ran a multi-billion-dollar technology company. And when he went through this, he was realizing, oh, I don't have W or I. And we are not actually asking the big questions about, we are really a well-oiled machine, but we're not necessarily headed in the right direction. And maybe there's parts of this machine we don't need anymore. And so he had to actually change the roles of the people on the team and the way they ran their meetings in order to address some of these topics that he just wasn't naturally good at.
Yeah.
It's amazing how much self-awareness and awareness of the meeting you're having just changes everything. It will create such relief. And I think we should watch another video clip.
Yes.
I think that this is another really fun one. Do you want to tee it up?
Yeah, Apollo 13. If you haven't seen it, that's okay, but you should. And we won't tell you how it ends. But so it's the scene after they've realized that the guys on the up in space are going to die because they're not getting enough oxygen, because there's some problems with their filters and everything, and they have to do something about it.
Yeah.
The guys down on the ground in Houston. So is that enough?
I think so. Let's watch it.
Let's watch.
Okay, people, listen up. People upstairs handed us this one, and we gotta come through. We gotta find a way to make this fit into the hole for this, using nothing but that. Let's get it organized.
Okay, let's build a filter.
Better get some coffee going, too, someone.
Deadly CO2 gas is literally poisoning the astronauts with every breath in and out.
Heads up, heads up.
And spokespeople will not comment further.
Go. Heads up, people, look out now. What's this? That's what they gotta make. Well, I hope you got the procedures for me. Right here.
That's it?
Affirmative, Andy. Jack's got one right here.
Okay, we have an unusual procedure for you here.
We need you to rip the cover off.
I want you to rip the cover off the flight plan.
With pleasure.
All right, now the other materials you're going to need here are a lithium
hydroxide canister. You need 2 lithium hydroxide canisters, I'm sorry. A roll of gray tape.
Duct tape.
duct tape. You need an LCG bag, 2 LCG bags, the red suit hoses. You've got the flight plan covered.
All right.
I love that movie.
Yeah, it's a fantastic
Great movie.
And this is a little tricky here, right? Because it's easy to think, and there definitely is some inventing going on. So somebody could go, oh, that's all about invention.
They're definitely not wondering. They know what the problem is.
Yes.
Right?
And nobody gets to go, maybe thermodynamics doesn't work the way we think it does.
Yeah, right.
It's an emergency. And when you're in an emergency, you're definitely getting down here.
Yeah.
And I love when the guy comes in there and he just throws his stuff and goes, we need to do this with this stuff here.
Yeah.
And we've got a short period of time to do it. So there's a crap load of galvanizing right there. And then people jumping in to get it done are enabling. And ultimately they have to fix it and get it done by the end. And so there's all of this stuff going on, but there's some I going on down here, micro I.
Yeah, and typically we talk about I like, oh, I want a blank slate to solve this problem from. In that clip, they have the smallest sandbox to play in. It's like, so there's only micro invention. It's not like, hey, think of anything you could use to solve this problem. It's like, here's the only resources you have.
The parameters are this.
Yeah.
And then when it goes on to the ship, it's all about T.
Yeah. Build it like this.
We have to do this. We're not rethinking anything. It's like follow instructions and directions. And I remember when I watched that scene, I'd be like, I'm glad I wasn't on there because I'd have been like, I don't know how to tear the tape correctly, you know?
Yeah.
And so there was, and before the clip began, there was the D. They went to Ed Harris, who said, what's going on? Okay, you need to do that. And that was over. And so then they went into GET mode. Make sense?
Yeah.
Totally makes sense. Okay, God, there's so much we could talk about.
Well, there was that one question that somebody asked that said, what does a person do with their geniuses? The ID could have been really important down here.
Yeah.
So it's not like, well, it's not an ID thing. They needed somebody with invention and discernment within the parameters.
Yeah.
So like if I were there, I would say, well, I'd be useless. But they might have just said, hey, can you figure this one little thing out? And then my eye becomes relevant even in the context of this. So you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So it's not like
It's not like invention is just limited to, hey, stay up there in offsite land, because there's going to be times where, we were doing this an hour before the event, where we're still a little bit of inventing of, there's a little bit of space here. How do we make it a little bit better?
And I think that's true about, there's macro, which is where it's purely in your world, and then there's the micro. Maybe a W would have been sitting there going, hey, maybe there's something else on the ship that they could use. So it's micro Wing to help them do this. Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense.
And that's important for people to realize when you think, I don't want to go to that meeting because it doesn't suit me. Well, we need everything represented in some way, but it might be just a micro example of that. The T that comes to the brainstorming meeting might say, okay, I totally get that. I'm not going to rain on their parade, but I do think there's a practical concern they might be avoiding that might make this.
And it would inform the invention.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
And they go, remember this, you guys, that piece of thing you just, and so it's not like you're not useful. It just, you need to kind of, submit to what was going on there and use it within the context of that.
Fantastic. Okay, I want to dive into some really, really practical things. You guys have been trying to solve meetings since you wrote this book 19 years ago. And a lot of times we'll have meetings at a whiteboard, right? Sometimes we have meetings where we're sitting on an airplane and you and I are having a conversation or a meeting. And we've been on the hunt for what are the tools that can help more people be able to have more effective meetings. And we actually have a partnership that has helped us be able to do that. You guys have been really influential in designing a digital solution that helps people have better meetings. And we couldn't go the hour without just getting a chance to talk about it. So,
yeah, I'd love to. I was looking forward to this. So we have, in fact, Leader, the company, Leadr, is on the webinar. Hi, our friends at Leader. And we are partnering with them to build an organizational health type solution in technology.
And Cody, it's worth saying for years we kept thinking, should we build a technology solution around this? And our customers would say, you should do a system around that. And we look at it every time and we go, we're not good at that.
Yeah.
That's not our thing. And then we accidentally met these amazing people in Texas that have this company. And we were like, we finally found the people that do this.
Yeah. And they're doing it so well. And the most relevant thing, so this has some exclusive content of yours in it. It helps develop leaders. It does one-on-one. Some of you are asking questions in the comments about one-on-one. But as relevant to the webinar that we have today is they took our weekly tactical format for meetings. Like, here's how we prescribe doing a weekly tactical meeting. They built it into that software and they incorporated Working Genius. So everything that we just talked about here, when you log into a meeting, it says, hey, here's what you have represented by the people in this meeting.
Right.
So it gives context for that. So our friends at Leader, we're working with them to to basically scale organizational health.
And it's
it
just
starts
starting.
in meetings.
Right, and we're just starting this partnership. We're going to be developing more and more. We want you just to check them out. Because
And I think they're going to drop a link in the chat. If you want to get a demo, you can click on that link.
Julie did
That team
already.
is amazing. And so we're happy to be partnering with them. And it will do so much to give you an advantage in your meetings. To use a tool like that to have the right conversations and have more effective.
Our team started using it, and it just helps to have a digital solution to help elevate meetings, to just make them better.
We've been getting so many great questions, and Matt is back there saying he gets a question, he's ready to give it to us, and then in the next segment we answer it.
Yeah.
And so we love the fact that we've been getting such great questions. Some of them are naturally getting answered. Do we have a couple others?
We do. So I'd love for you to talk about the end of meetings. How do you end a meeting well?
Okay, and this is critical, and I'm not good at it because I don't end anything. I like lose interest and move on to the next thing. In fact, including writing.
This webinar will end though.
Thank
At some point we will.
Thank you, Tracy, for making me finish my books. But at the end of a meeting, there's this discipline. It's so simple to make such a difference, and that is, at the end of the meeting, when everybody wants to get out of there, you've had a good meeting. You're like, okay, good, let's go. You have to say, no, wait a second. We need 3 more minutes. First, let's be clear about what we agreed to do. And even though people can be sitting around the same table and speaking the same language, it's amazing how at the end of the meeting you go, so we agreed to do this, right? And somebody will go, oh, whoa, I didn't think we were agreeing on that. I thought we were just talking about it. And so just what do we call that?
Discuss. What did we discuss? Like, oh, some of that, if we didn't make a decision, we just had a conversation about that thing.
So let's agree on what we talked about so we can go share it with others.
And then decide, did we make any decisions on that?
Right.
And then what do we say? A lot of the questions were like, how do you cascade the communication at the end of the meeting? And if you just take the last 3 minutes to say, hey, here's what I need you, everybody in this meeting and on our team, to go out and tell the people in your part of the organization, go out and say and cascade all of what we discussed and decided.
Right. And I put disseminate. I came up with a D word because that's really what it is, right? So take the time at the end of the meeting to do that, and then make sure the people are at the meeting and say, go share this with the people that work for you. Go tell them. Call them up. Don't send an email. Just tell them that. We've seen that we call it cascading communication. If you can get at the top of an organization, the leadership team and the next level and just the next level to hear the same things coming out of your meetings, it will permeate the rest of the organization, no doubt. If you can just get those 2 levels on the same page coming out of a meeting, you're going to change communication at your meetings.
And you'd be surprised how often, like, let's say we were planning our next webinar in a meeting and we talked about what the content might be. When we get to the end of the conversation, somebody's going to say, oh, we decided to do it on teamwork, right? And you're going to say, oh, I don't think we decided yet. So that might go back and say, hey, let's go have an ad hoc strategic meeting about the next event. So it just clarifies, and the cascading communication is huge.
Yeah. We've seen so many leadership teams where at the end of the meeting, when they do this, they go, oh my gosh, I was about to run out and tell my people to do something, and we're not really on the same page yet, are we? And they're like, no. And you catch yourself, because we all know what it's like to clean up those kind of messes. Let's catch them before that happens. So that's a great way to end meetings. And frankly, it's often G, the people to go out and communicate, T, get really clear about what the actual answers to those questions are.
Okay, tell me about meeting agendas. I know we're just a few minutes left. Are you for meeting agendas? How do you think about structuring the meeting, especially that weekly tactical meeting?
I am generally anti-meeting agendas because often until you get in the room, you don't know what that agenda is. It's okay to go to think like, I think this is what we should be talking about, but then you get into the room with people and you go, what's going on? And like, we like to do the thing where you go through your thematic goal and your standard operating objectives and then your defining objectives, and you look at the red, yellow, green, usually the agenda appears and you go, whoa, those 2 things are red, we better talk about those. So I think when you overcommit to an agenda ahead of time, you limit your flexibility to talk about the most important things. Now,
and you usually end up talking about whoever submitted agenda items first.
Yes.
And then it's whoever printed it, well, we're stuck with this. And it's like, no, let's look at what must we do right now? What is most important? Therefore, what do we need to talk about today?
Or the person who galvanizes the CEO the most gets on the agenda, and it shouldn't be driven by the people, it should be driven by the situation and what we need.
And then what tends to happen is it just goes in whatever order somebody put it in. And the most important thing is at the end, and you only have 5 minutes, and then you try to squeeze a really important conversation. So what you said, the red, yellow, green, what is in the weekly tactical meeting, is a way of evaluating, hey, if things are green, why would we waste our time at this meeting talking about that?
And we do it all the time.
We do it all the time.
Wow.
Are we about at the end of our
We've got
session?
2 minutes left.
Okay, 2 minutes left. So I just want to leave people with this. Meetings are about strategic advantage. It's not just like, let's make them better because they're painful. That's worth doing it. But the best companies will have the best meetings. Start there. If a company came to me, and I wouldn't have said this 20 years ago and said, what should I start? The first thing I would say was, let's work on your meetings. Because from that, organizational health becomes clear, working genius becomes clear, all the other things we do makes more sense.
Yeah.
So meetings are one of the most important areas where you must have a competitive advantage to do well. The first thing I want you to do, though, is know who you are and who you're bringing to your meeting. Know what you think the meeting is going to be about, and at the beginning of every meeting say, hey, where do we think we are in this?
Yeah.
And make sure people are on the same page. You will reduce boredom, stress, anxiety, guilt, and judgment, and you will walk out of those meetings saying, I actually can't wait till our next meeting. And that's how meetings should be. It should be something people look forward to and see as an important, critical, and enjoyable part of work life.
And a lot of you, but this is so fun, a lot of you are asking, I want to watch this again. I want to get to see this again. So you can watch it again tonight at 7 p.m. Pacific, tomorrow at 7 a.m. Pacific, and we're going to add another one a week from today, same bad time, same bad channel.
Yeah, we're not thinking you want to watch us again, but you might say, I want my team to watch it again, or you might say, hey, I want somebody else to see this.
Yeah.
Like if other people, so we want you to have opportunities to do that. And if you're in Micronesia or you're in Australia or in Asia or New Zealand, that's one of these.
We'll send you an email with all of that, and we'll make sure we add the links to the clips because people are asking for that too.
Oh, good.
Awesome.
And the last thing is we did one for next week in case you need to rally to G your team to all sit down and watch it together. Because if everybody hears this at the same time, they will probably say, it's time to do this.
Yeah.
We hope so.
So fun. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, Pat. Hey, meetings matter, and it's so possible just in this conversation to be able to make them a little bit better for the people around you, for the mission of your organization. So you guys, any last thoughts?
I think I already did my last thought.
Yeah. I couldn't have said it better, so I let him do it.
Okay, we'll cut the last 2 seconds. No, just kidding. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining us. God bless. See you soon.